Good evening. Thank you for joining this weekly broadcast on Live on Purpose community page. My name is Patty Baker, and I'm glad to be here with you as you join recorded in a time that's convenient for you. It allows me to talk to you for a minute while others are joining in on this live broadcast. So if you've not watched me recorded before, I do on the front end say hello to the people who are joining, and then beyond that, after this goes recorded for you to watch, I always put in the comments anything that I reference throughout, usually the Bible or something online or a resource that you can reference for yourself based upon the topic that is here. All topics come from the Facebook Messenger. So if you have a topic or question that you would like to hear about on Thursday night, drop me a line, say hello. If you are joining me recorded, also leave a comment so that I can give you a shout out as well. If you like tonight's topic, please go ahead and like it, share it. You can copy the link. You can share it now and start a watch party if you want. You can also put it in an email, text message, Facebook Messenger, or just post it over to your page. So without further ado, for those of you joining me live, hey, happy Thursday night to you. I hope you're having a great day. It is rainy here in South Carolina, and so I am enjoying being inside this evening and spending this time with you. I see all of you who are joining. However, I will not acknowledge you unless you make a comment, and there is a 10-second delay. And without further ado, I want to say a quick shout out to you, Miss Joelle. I love seeing you when you join in, and it's always wonderful to see you, darling. Tonight's topic comes from a woman who is struggling with dealing with her husband who is dealing with trauma. So, hey, Doug, wonderful to see you tonight, sir. Glad you're in the house. So I want to talk a little bit around this topic, and I always say this, and this isn't just me, okay, this is for, I believe, everybody, but isn't it something like when we're working on a project or we buy a car, everybody else has the car, we're working on a project and all of a sudden we're like, oh yeah, I'm seeing all these other things connect, and that usually is what happens to me in the few weeks leading up to me doing this broadcast. And so I've had that opportunity to, and I want to share some of those experiences with you tonight too. Sunny and Eddie, great to see you tonight, Ed. Thanks for being here. What is trauma? I'm going to give you the quick down and dirty for this. Trauma is when you experience something uncontrollable and intolerable. Whether it's been done to you or you to someone else, whether in war or in the midst of atrocities, 9/11, for example, hurricane, so on and so forth, or any number of other scenarios. I want to just talk for a second about soldiers who return from conflicts and war. First and foremost, I believe it was back in World War I, 1914, 1915 or so, when the medical community was noticing that the soldiers weren't quite right when they were returning home. They didn't have any physical brain injuries. Like there were no physical wounds, but yet they were suffering from amnesia, and they were suffering from tinnitus and all of the headaches, dizziness, tremors, hypersensitivity to noises, hypersensitivity to light, and they couldn't explain what it was, and so they labeled it as shell shock. And the British, when they began looking at their soldiers as well coming out of World War I, they were like, you know what? We're not going to label our men as having shell shock. What we're going to do is when we put in our medical reports, we're going to put in NYDN, not yet diagnosed nervous. And so it was still kind of a taboo thing that they didn't want to address it. They didn't know how to address it. And so it was just nervous behavior. But while these symptoms resembled that which would look like a head injury, there was never a head wound. And so they at that time in the early 1900s couldn't sort it out. World War II brought the same. shell shock still continued. And it wasn't until, I believe, 1980 when the psychological community came up with a term to list all of these symptoms as PTSD. And that was in 1980. And that was as a result of seeing what was coming, what was playing out years with World War II. Of course, all of the studies that had happened during World War I, and then what was happening with our Vietnam veterans. So PTSD is something that we know pretty general today in our culture, and it goes beyond our military communities and into our workplace and our social environments. And so I want to talk a little bit about that tonight. But as of September 2014, there are 2.7 million American veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and that is compared to 2.6 million Vietnam veterans who fought in Vietnam. Now, there were 8.2 million Vietnam-era veterans, personnel, if you will, who served anywhere during the time of the Vietnam War. But on the ground, 2.6 million. I'm pulling these statistics from the Veterans Affairs and also from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. And so roughly we have about the same number of soldiers in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam. And at least 20% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans have PTSD or depression. Now, distributed through the military, Army has the most. 67% of the cases are coming out of the Army, 9% out of the Air Force, 11% out of the Navy, and 13% out of the Marines. Military counselors, they state that in their opinion, that number of 20% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans is skewed. There is way more than 20%. It's much, much higher, and that combines, and that even doubles almost when you add in those who have traumatic brain injuries. So that's physical head injury, and then the psychological attached to it. So let's bring this closer to home. I'm talking about military and PTSD, trauma and the effects of it there, but I want to also bring in those symptoms a little closer to home. And the CDC, Center for Disease Control, reports that 1 in 5 children are molested, that 1 in 3 experience physical violence, and 1 in 8 witness their mother being beaten. In general, 1 in 4 children experience some form of child abuse or neglect in our country. Let me tie this together for you. For every soldier who serves in a war zone abroad, there are 10 children endangered in their own homes in our country. 1 in 10. These are enemy combatants, if you will. These are usually by their own caretakers, and these children grow to have learned helplessness. They grow into adults who suffer from PTSD, from the trauma that they've experienced, witnessed, the atrocities that they've been through, and the circumstances that they've lived in growing up. This is on home soil, folks. And with these numbers, what that means is that you have been directly affected, or you know of someone who has. And I know that this is a sobering topic tonight, but let me tell you, if we're not talking about it, who is? Because I'm not hearing this in my social settings unless it's in the confidence of a friend. I'm not hearing it in the church. I'm not hearing it being spoken out unless someone has a heart and a passion for it, or they've been healed from it and they want to help others. And so I want to give you some of these symptoms just as a broad brush, because we don't want to believe that physical violence like rape, abuse, human trafficking, molestation is happening on civilized property like the United States. But the fact of the matter is, it's happening. And we want to believe that it's happening far off in some third world country, and we can shut it off when we don't want to watch it. And then, we're walking among those, if we're tuning all this out, yet we walk among those who are struggling internally because they're having memories, they're dealing with flashbacks, they have circumstances that are triggering those flashbacks. They can't control when the flashbacks are going to occur or how long that they're going to last. And so they've set up a life to kind of protect themselves in our culture from these flashbacks, whether it's drugs, alcohol, pumping iron, creating illusions in their mind. Their memories are leading to nightmares. They're trying to recreate memories so that they can function in a healthy way like normal people do. And because it's a situation that we can't wrap our brains around if we haven't gone through it or haven't experienced it, then it's difficult for them to be open to talk about it. And so so people who are dealing with trauma normally try and repress what they have happening. They don't talk about it. They become numb toward it. And in the midst of trying to do that, their past is still creeping into their present. So it's no wonder that people who are traumatized by experiences and events choose to erase the memories from their mind and try to cope on their own without talking about it. And then, the other thing that they struggle with is they don't mean to do this, but they superimpose what has happened to them onto everything else around them. And that everything that's happening in the present is contaminated by their past. And our imagination allows us to envision all these new possibilities, right? However, it's difficult for someone who has or is dealing with trauma to alleviate the pain. And so we can do things to increase our happiness, and without imagination, there's no hope. And when that part of their brain has been shut down, then they live in this place of helplessness. So even if you're in a cage and the cage doors open, you don't leave because you have this sense of learned helplessness, if that makes sense. And so many people who are living in trauma or with post-trauma symptoms come up with some sort of a cover story so that it's safe for human consumption. And it's sad because we as a society have not yet embraced that people are hurting and need a safe place to share what's happening with them. And so when you have gone through trauma, part of your brain shuts down. And the unbearable physical pain or the sight of the experience or the emotions that are attached to it create a lot of things in the brain that really psychotherapists use their patients to be mentors for them as they begin to learn how trauma affects the brain through therapy. And through therapy, therapists are learning as well how trauma affects the brain and then how to begin to back out of that to help people with their trauma and the symptoms that are arising out of that. And some people will go to different forms if that part of their brain becomes activated where they're having flashbacks, where they're having memories, where they're having problems functioning, where they're lashing out, then what they try and do is shut that part of their brain off. And so they'll do that with drugs, they'll do that with alcohol, they'll do that with binge eating. They try to disconnect from their body. Some of them haven't had emotions, haven't felt anything since the trauma. And so they will resort to trying to feel something, even if that's self-mutilation, even if that's cutting themselves, in order to, if they can at least feel pain, then they can at least feel something. And so these are some of the things that we see, either people who have been through trauma or are going through trauma will try and disconnect from their body, or they'll try and connect to their body, depending upon what part of the brain is activated or reactivated, or what part of the brain that they're trying to activate. So it's almost like, if you've never been through trauma, it's almost like closing your eyes and someone puts a quarter in your hand and says, okay, what's in your hand? You can't see it, but based upon it, you can at least feel it, that enough to say it's a quarter. And for many who deal with trauma, it's like that for their brain. You put a quarter there and they can't feel it. There's something there. Maybe they don't even know that there's the weight of something is there. So there's no feeling. So tonight's topic about trauma and dealing with trauma comes from a woman whose husband is having a difficult time coping with being at home with their young children. And she does not know the whole circumstances of his past. She doesn't know if this happened in his childhood, if it happened while he was in the military. But he had to leave the house for a few days because the stress from the kids and them running around and being children was creating a lot of anxiety for him. It was triggering something in his brain, and he had to leave the house for a few days and go stay at a hotel. And she was distraught about it. He said to her, I have to leave the house or else I'm going to do something that I'm going to regret. And I know myself well enough that I have to remove myself from the home. And he said, it's nothing to do with you. I'm not having an affair. This has to do with me. And I can't stay here. I can't stay here. And so what happened was he left. He went on an alcoholic binge for the weekend, basically to numb his brain. And she was distraught in, I've lost my husband. I don't know what's happened to him. He's out of his mind. He didn't tell me what was going on, but something that the kids were doing, and the kids are just being natural, and he can't help it. He doesn't know what's going on, and he must know what's going on, but he's not wanting to tell me, but he says he fully doesn't understand, and I don't know who he is right now. And so it made me think about some other things that have happened and some conversations that I've had with friends of mine who have experienced trauma and things in their past that is now seeping into their present because it hasn't been addressed in a healthy way. So, the thoughts in his mind are coming to the forefront, and it's going to lead to an action that he doesn't want to have happen, whatever that is. Who wants to talk to your loved ones and your friends about this? When you've done atrocious things to other people, or atrocious things have been done to you, or you have witnessed things that have changed the trajectory of your brain forever, it seems like, right? So I want to give you some solutions for tonight, because I'm talking very broad brush, but I don't want for a second, I can go into a lot of details about different stories and different things that have come through the Facebook Messenger of people who are struggling. But you know what? There's enough of us that you get it. You either know somebody or you have yourself. But I want to talk a little bit about the brain tonight and how it works, just a little bit, because I want to give some solutions for this. Oftentimes, the first thing that people do is they go to their regular doctor and then they get treated for a symptom. That symptom could be anxiety, it could be depression, it could be any number of symptoms. However, The symptoms are not the problem. The problem is creating the symptoms. Now, I don't want to discount the medication. I believe that it's very useful along with other things that I'm going to talk about here in a minute. But I want to talk about this one first because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry and people are diagnosed based upon symptoms, given drugs and sent home for 30 days and you come back for another 30 days, how you feeling, and you get a refill. Let me tell you what happens with these drugs. The Zocors, the Zoloft, the Effexors, the Prozac, the Cymbalta, all the antidepressants, the sleeping pills, because you can't sleep at night. You know, if antidepressants work, why is everybody still on them forever? That's what I want to know. That's my point. You're fixing maybe a symptom, but all it is a Band-Aid, because what's going on underneath the surface is still there. People are on antidepressants and yet they never get better. Why? Drugs are not the only way to fix people. I believe they're a method. They address the symptoms, but not the underlying issue, which is why I believe that therapy, counseling, is still important and a vital component in the healing process. Psychotherapy, therapy, counseling, psychologist, however you want to say it, okay? Those of you who have experienced trauma, your trauma gets in the way of working through your emotions and on some level, okay? And so get in touch with a competent therapist, one who understands trauma and has been on the receiving end of trauma therapy. And although therapists can't go into all of their details of their own trauma because they're in a clinical setting, you can at least ask them, has this therapist been schooled in trauma? Do they specialize in dealing with people who've been through traumatic situations? You know, you are not a list of symptoms. You are a unique person, and that therapist needs to see you not as a PTSD patient, but as a unique individual that has had experienced or experiences that has led to this place where you are now. And finding a therapist, my friend said, who was sexually abused as a child, and I spoke to her a little bit about this last week as I was preparing this message, and she said, finding a therapist is like trying on a pair of shoes. Just because you go to one doesn't mean that might not be the right fit, that, it might not be the right fit for you. You've got to try it out. You might not feel safe talking to that person. They may look at you more clinically than as a human being. They may be so focused on some method that is the only method they use, and that method is supposed to be great for everybody, and yet it might not be. So although touch therapy might work great for someone, animal therapy might work great for someone else. And so patients become mentors in the psychological arena because we're studying as we go. That's why they call it a practice. So be aware to get somebody with experience in dealing with traumatic situations. I had a friend who just had a separation from another friend because they saw that there was a little bit of, for lack of a better term, I guess, some dysfunction in their friendship. And so the one friend asked me, hey, will you reach out to my other friend because this is getting dysfunctional and I've got to remove myself from it. And as I began to look at some of this person's symptoms, she is the adult child of an alcoholic. And so I was able to recognize those symptoms and was able to talk to her, and she's been going to see a therapist. And I said, how long have you been seeing this therapist? Oh, quite a while. Okay, have you talked to them about these symptoms? No, I don't want to talk to anybody about that. Well, I think you've established a relationship enough that if you can explain this to your therapist, I think this would help your therapist to be able to help you. So when you can go into a therapist and you talk about your day, about your week, about how you feel, that's great. But we're not getting back to the core root issue of what the symptom is. And for some people with trauma, it's so repressed that they don't even remember it. They don't even remember the details of it, or they don't even remember that it's happened. So that may be an issue in and of itself. But if you are aware that these things might be happening, and my friend and this young woman said to me, well, I didn't even know that there was such a thing as adult child of alcoholics having these kinds of symptoms and how that could be helped. I didn't even know. Right? But the reason why is because she's so embarrassed, she's so ashamed, she feels such guilt about her family upbringing that she doesn't want to bring it up to anybody else. And so when we begin to build relationships with others and we see certain habits or things happening, it allows us to be able to speak to that ever so gently and just to kind of press in just a little bit and build that relationship and find out if there is something going on there. And then be able to help them, to direct them. We're not therapists. You and I are not therapists. We can't solve people's problems. But through our own wounds, we can help people heal. And through our own experiences with other people, we might be able to shed some light on a situation to help others heal. I was a compulsive overeater and a food addict for many, many years. And it was rooted from a couple of traumatic experiences that I had in my teenage years. And I didn't realize that this was an issue for me at all until I went and was to a personal trainer back in 2005. And he said, I don't know what's happening here, why I can't work with you. Keep a food diary. And when he saw I was eating 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day, he was like, man, you don't even look like you're eating 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day. But now I see that I'm monitoring your exercise. I also see now that you're out of control. And I can't help you. You need to see a therapist. I had no idea what he was talking about. It was like a foreign language. I went to my doctor. She said, no, your body weight looks great. My body weight did look decent. I was a little overweight, but it wasn't that much. I went to church and I said, I don't know what's going on. I guess I need prayer, but I lost my trainer. My doctor says I'm fine. And she was a person who was 100 pounds overweight 5 or 6 years before and had struggled. And as she heard my symptoms, she heard her story. And she was able to then share her story without me ever recognizing that I had a problem, but it resonated with me. And then she introduced me to a 12-step program that I went to, got a sponsor, and then I became a sponsor to someone else. So I'm sharing all of this with you because I want you to know that you can be a part of the healing process. Drugs is one thing, but therapy is just another tool. Having body awareness and body sensations is sometimes difficult for people with trauma because they have removed the sensations from their bodies because of the type of trauma that they've had done to them. I know that Tai Chi, martial arts, yoga, these kind of focused movements are really good in helping you, kickboxing, things like that. Because they allow us to get in touch with our physical bodies with our minds. However, sometimes not, these kind of mindful movements, these types of things don't always address the emotional side. So there are some emotional healing techniques. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I can give you one right now, and that's just breathing. If you can just breathe through your nose and breathe out your mouth. What are you feeling in that moment? Maybe there's anxiousness and there's a tightness in the pit of your stomach. Okay. Maybe now you're just feeling a little neck tightness. You do it again and now you're like, you know what? I feel my rib cage actually expanding. So you're feeling, right? You have a feeling. And then that anxiety that was coming into your stomach is now moved to different areas. So a therapist can help you to get back in touch with your emotions in that way. The last thing I want to talk about is just good support network. Now, I'm going to give you some places where you can go for some good support network. Relationships that are safe is really what I'm talking about, because safety and terror are incompatible. You can't have safety and terror at the same time. So getting in safe support relationships, safe support networks are good. Religious organizations. For some, if you've been sexually abused by a priest, for example, a religious organization probably isn't going to help you. But for others, that may be a safe place. So filter through what that's going to work. And as you're talking to somebody, what's going to work for them. Support groups such as Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon for adult children of alcoholics. Group therapy. Family and friends. to the place where they can be safe. For some of you, they're not safe for you to address with. Social support could be a battered women's shelter, something like that. Sometimes for us, and I'm talking about this in safe relationships, but being touched, being hugged, being rocked, these three things just that are from an infant place, right, are very comforting. They can be if it's done in a way that's healthy. And so it gives a feeling of safety, and it realigns that safety. But it has to be done with someone with whom you feel safe with. So for example, someone who's been raped, having someone come up from behind them and give them a hug, it probably freaks them out. It may, depends on the circumstance. And so all of a sudden that touch didn't work. But if they were in touch therapy, or if there was measured touching that was happening with them where they could become comfortable again in being touched, then it's something that they could work through. But this has to happen in the safety of a great support network. Being wounded is one thing. Wanting to be healed is another. And so there's a choice that you have to make. Are you going to walk in your woundedness, or are you and be a part of the walking wounded and walk around like a zombie, or are you going to fight for yourself and walk out your healing? As we heal, we can help others heal. We can move past the shame, the guilt, the embarrassment, because what we're doing is we're healing in the midst of helping. And so I'm going to leave you now just to think on these things, to think about people in your life. I just ask that you would just stop for a minute and say, God, show me the people in my life who are hurting and how they're hurting and how I can come alongside. I leave you with this last one. This woman who was raised as being one who was sexually abused has now gone on to have children, and her child is he has a lot of developmental disabilities because she wasn't the mother that she needed to be to him in those developmental years because of her own trauma that she was dealing with, and she didn't know how to relate to her child. And so a mother from the church, not my church, but a church, has come alongside her and does house visits and sits with her and helps to show her how to parent her child. And she says, I don't know, but I'm just showing her what I know as have healthy children in my home, and I've had a healthy upbringing. And this has allowed me to talk, and it's allowed her to talk. And now this mother's getting therapy, and the child's getting therapy, and they're getting better. And this woman's coming in and doing house visits. So I don't know what that looks like for you, but take a moment and just pray for those people that you know in your life. Maybe you have a better understanding of a coworker or a student that is acting or being the way that they are because there's something deeper that maybe they're not even aware of that's happening, or a spouse that maybe has something traumatic that's happened in their past that is so grotesque, things that they've done in war or in other places in their life that they could not even begin to fathom to you that has happened. And so I ask that you just move with sensitivity. Part of this community is to live on purpose, to be intentional in our living, and in loving others, that we would love ourselves and give of ourselves in order to love others. I'm not going to go through the comments tonight, but I do want to tell you I love you all. I'm so glad to be here. I'm glad to join you on this journey in this life to live on purpose. As I always end, I say, love God, love others, and love yourself. Good night.